Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Rosado, and I work at the Connecticut State Department of Education in the Performance Office. Excited to welcome you today to a webinar about the best practices for servicing English learners focusing on dual language programs. This webinar is a part of a series of webinars that the Connecticut State Department of Education has introduced to assist districts in educating students during this time of virtual learning. So we hope that everyone is doing well and want to just make sure that you understand that we're here to offer assistance. So please feel free to reach out to us at the CSDE. Just a little housekeeping before I turn it over to our presenters. Just a reminder, you are in listen only mode. However, you should feel free to ask questions. You'll see a questions box in your control panel. Please type your questions in there, and our presenters will have some time at the end to answer your questions. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the State Department of Education's COVID-19 District Resource page. I'm really excited. We've got an amazing team of educators and State Department of Education educators as well who are going to take us through this topic. I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Megan Alubicki-Flick. Megan.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for being here today with us. I have the honor of introducing my colleagues at the State Department as well as colleagues in various districts around Connecticut. For this presentation, you'll be hearing from myself and my close colleague, Michael Ceballos from our Performance Office as well. Although she will not be speaking today, our dear colleague, Pei, has also been contributing to this presentation and to the research that we'll be discussing. In addition, we have Maribel Olivero from New London Public Schools, Pedro Mendiolanda from New Haven Public Schools, and Denise Massari from Stratford Public Schools. They all have a unique experience implementing dual language programs, and I'm eager to hear from all of them. Okay, so I'm going to get started by just talking a little bit about our Connecticut bilingual statute. So the bilingual statute is section 1017 E through J, and it includes the definitions, describes the bilingual grant, the funding, the requirements for districts, and other topics that pertain to the implementation of bilingual programs. It's quite specific. For those of you that have looked at it before, which many of you I'm sure have, there's a lot of specificity in this statute. And that level of specificity really guides our implementation of bilingual programs in the state. While the language in the statute requires mandated districts to consider implementing dual language programs, the statute really focuses on a transitional program model. Next. The bilingual statute specifies the annual funding amount for this grant, which is approximately $1.9 million annually. Essentially, that means the grant is flat funded. However, as many of you are aware, the demographics in Connecticut have shifted significantly over the past several school years. Specifically, there are more and more English learners, both within larger urban contexts that historically have had a high number of English learners, and among the lower incidence and middle incidence communities that typically characterize our suburban and our rural communities. What that means is that more and more districts are being mandated to implement bilingual programs. At the same time, it also means that more schools within those districts are mandated to implement those programs. Next. In order to really understand what the bilingual statute is saying, I'd like to make a couple of comments about the statute itself. Specifically, A community is mandated to implement a bilingual program if there are 20 or more speakers of the same non-English native language within one school. I'd like to point out that in a sense, what this means is that the implementation of a bilingual program depends primarily on the demographics of the community, as opposed to the specific need of a given student. For instance, if a student that's had very limited English proficiency moved to one community where he or she was the only or one of very few students that spoke his or her native language, there would not be a mandate to implement a bilingual program for that child. However, if that same exact student with the same linguistic profile moved to, say, the neighboring community where there were at least 19 or more other students in his or her school that spoke the same native language, a bilingual program would be mandated to be offered to that child. The bilingual statute allows for students to participate in transitional bilingual programs for up to 30 months, and we think of that as 3 school years. As of 2015, there's a special permission that districts are able to apply for an extension for students to participate for up to 3 additional 10-month periods, meaning that a student has the right to participate in bilingual for 30 school months, and then a district can apply on his or her behalf to have the student participate for 30 additional months, but the district must apply in 10-month increments, meaning that each year that they seek additional time for a student, there is an additional application for that student's extension. An important piece to note about the bilingual statute is that it precludes students with less than 30 months before high school graduation from participating in a bilingual program. Next. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Cebedos to talk through some of the data.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to say how much I miss seeing you. The Capel meeting this morning was tough to not be interacting with all of you. And that's something, you know, in these crazy times that I think we all feel. And so on the one hand, I miss seeing your face, your faces. On the other hand, I am lucky enough that I can see my wife's beautiful face, and I've got some cats running around here, and I've got a rabbit sitting next to me. But as you all are doing, we're making the best of the situation. And apropos of like the situation this morning when we were answering questions at Capel, right at the end, wouldn't you know it, the Instacart shows up with the delivery. Like I said, I know we're all just doing our best in the situation and adapting. So what I'm going to do for my part of this is I'm going to build on and sort of flesh out what Megan talked about, what the law and implementation looks like. And I want to provide a statewide context to put the presentations for the individual districts as they're describing their robust and their innovative programs, kind of provide a statewide context when we're talking about the mandated bilingual programs. So when we talk about them, as Megan pointed out, it's really about the geography of ELS. And as we know statewide, there is this urban concentration where we find 15 or so districts have about maybe 60% or a little bit more of all ELS. However, on the other hand, especially over the last 5-7 years, we're seeing this diffusion of ELS across the state to more and more districts that never had ELS before. So this kind of pattern really influences bilingual education in our state. So for example, 190 districts in school year 18-19 had an L, but only 39 districts offer or were identified for a bilingual program. And again, that gets back to the concentration of ELS. Where are they? Over this time period, this 5-year time period from 14-15 to 18-19, 30 districts, 30 of those 39 in 18-19 had a program all 5 years. And so we're kind of seeing a playing out of that geographic concentration of L's. So on the one hand, the same districts offering a program over those 5 years. And then at the other end, you kind of have a cycling of districts. And let me talk about programs where it makes it even clearer. Over the last 5 years, 59% of the programs, and that's the school and the native language, offered a program all 5 years. Now, the implication of that is that given the stability of the program and the identification, it gives them time to develop resources, institutional knowledge, experience to be able to offer a robust and innovative program. And not that you, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have smaller districts who are identified 1 year and then may not be identified again. So about a quarter of all of the programs over this 5-year period either offered a program in 1 year, for 1 year, or 2. And that makes it more of a challenge for them to develop these resources. Not that they can't, but that it makes it more difficult, or it may be more challenging to be able to do. And what was also interesting over this 5-year period is when you look at growth in the number of programs by the size of the program, the largest growth that occurred was those programs that had at least 100 Ls, so the largest programs. The second most robust growth over this 5-year period were the smallest programs, those that had between 20 and 29 kids. So it's interesting that at both ends of the spectrum, in terms of the size of the size of the program, we're experiencing the most growth. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, language. In terms of the languages of the program, 2 things, and I know for this audience, everybody's aware of this. It's interesting how our student population reflects world events. So when I started 12 years ago doing this, you had programs in Serbo-Croatian, Albanian, Polish, but those have largely disappeared. And now you're seeing programs in Arabic, Creole Haitian, and Indian languages as the demographics of our student body change, certainly with influenced by world events. And the other thing that strikes me when you look at this table, for example, Mandarin, one Mandarin bilingual program in 18-19. However, statewide, there's almost 800 Ls who their native language is Mandarin. But again, it gets back to the concentration. Where are these language groups concentrated? Leading to the identification of a mandated bilingual program. And the perfect example on the other side of it is, for years, Hartford had to offer, or was identified to offer, a mandated program in Karen, because there is a large Karen community in Hartford. But statewide, really nowhere else. Very few Karen speakers anywhere else. But because of that concentration, Hartford was identified for that mandated bilingual program. Next slide, please. In terms of overall the program of students, the count for bilingual, this is the mandated count of students. Almost 90% of the bilingual students are in a transitional bilingual program. And I'm no programmatic expert, so I'll just give you the simple way I understand it, is that that's the goal is the development of proficiency in English using a declining amount of the student's native language over time. So you're encouraging just proficiency in English. There's also dual language, that's about 1,400 kids. Approximately 16 schools and about 6 districts that offer it. And there the goal is the development of proficiency in English as well as the student's native language. In practice, the dual language programs, the native language is Spanish. And where you're seeing growth in terms of bilingual education, it's a little bit more for the kids in the dual language program than it is for those kids in the transitional. It also strikes me that, like, in terms of bilingual, you're only seeing a growth in the number of L's of 6% at a time where L's grew 17%. So that growth is really kind of elsewhere. And again, it gets back to the concentration. Where are the L's? Next slide, please. So as you all know, when you're talking about L's, you're talking about a group of students that are really the preponderance is in the younger grades, K to 5. But it's interesting when you talk about bilingual, it's even a little bit younger. Really, the preponderance, almost half of the kids are K to 2. Now, in part, it gets back to that point that Megan made, that the way the bilingual statute is written, that students with fewer than 30 months can't participate in a bilingual program, and that's almost 900 kids. So that certainly has an impact on this, but largely we're talking about younger students when we talk about bilingual kids. Next slide, please. Some other key demographics. 28% of these students are immigrants, which means there may be issues of limited or interrupted formal education. There could be PTSD if the student was fleeing some traumatic natural disaster or political or civil disaster. 14% have also been identified for special education. This is lower than it is for L's in general. It's usually about over 20%. And like other L's, 80% of bilingual students are also eligible for free or reduced price meals. The other thing that I would note too, and for those of you who are on the Capel presentation, Ajit did mention this, is about, and as you all know, L mobility. And that gets back to a point that that Megan was making, and we see this often when we're looking at the data, is you have a student who starts out in a bilingual program and then either they move to a different school within that district or they move out of district and now they're no longer receiving bilingual education, before they've met that 30-month max. Next slide, please. The CSDE is doing an analytical project where we're looking at bilingual education, and we're reaching out to districts like we're fortunate to have our district participants on this presentation. We want to look at bilingual education. We want to look at the outcomes for students who participate in a bilingual program compared to other instructional models in terms of English language proficiency or performance on academic assessments. Both within snapshot years, but also looking longitudinally. So we've identified 3 cohorts of students who are first-time L and first-time Connecticut public school students for the years 13-14, 14-15, and 15-16. And we're just going to track those kids over time, both while they're in L and for those who master, to reach and see, okay, longitudinally, do we see some kind of spike in performance over time longitudinally? We also want to focus on the dual language programs too, because we know the national research really indicates that this is a very strong model in producing positive outcomes for English learners. So we want to focus a little bit on them, maybe some case studies of particular programs within the state, and we'll see what we find. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to turn it back over to Megan now.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to be touching on a couple points in a bit more detail that Michael set up during the slides that he was just presenting. First, I want to frame dual language programs. So what do we mean when we're talking about dual language programs? These programs are a type of bilingual program. In order to understand the distinction or how these terms relate, I encourage you to think of bilingual programs as the overarching category, or like an umbrella, for instance. So bilingual programs is that umbrella. And underneath that umbrella, there are transitional bilingual programs as well as dual language programs. I'm simplifying a little bit here, but for our purposes today, it's just really important to understand the differentiation between transitional and dual language programs. So as Michael alluded to earlier, a transitional program has the ultimate intention of just ensuring that students develop proficiency in English. And the native language is used essentially in the service of the development of English. And the native language drops off as the English language progresses. Though that means that transitional programs are subtractive. There is no goal in a transitional program to maintain or develop a heritage or native language. However, in the case of a one-way dual language or a two-way dual language program, these programs are additive in nature. This means that while the students are learning English, they are concurrently being encouraged to develop their academic language and their general language proficiency in their native language as well. A one-way program is a dual language program that is intended for one group of kids. Typically, that one group of kids would be a collection of students that speak the same, generally non-English native language. So for our context in Connecticut, usually that would be a group of Spanish-speaking students. They would be developing their Spanish concurrently as they develop their English. For a two-way program, we're looking at two separate groups of kids. Typically speaking, for a Connecticut context, we would talk about a group of native English-speaking children and a group of native speakers of the same non-English native language, typically being Spanish in terms of Connecticut's context. So there would be the native English speakers and the native Spanish speakers, and together they would both learn English and Spanish, as well as having their content, their instruction in both English and Spanish, so that they're developing academic language and academic skills in both languages. It's important to note that the Connecticut Bilingual Statute does not limit time in dual language programs. Also, as Michael mentioned in his previous slide, a significant body of research shows that dual language programs result in better academic outcomes for students. These four references here are the tip of the iceberg. Collier and Thomas are renowned, internationally renowned researchers that have a significant collection of research focused almost exclusively on the benefits of dual language programs. They've done longitudinal research for years. I've also included a couple of research studies that are more recent that looked at outcomes for students. But there is a lot more. This is, like I said, the tip of the iceberg. It's very important to note here, positive outcomes for students in dual language programs become more visible over time. While the research shows that ultimately students in dual language programs have much better outcomes academically, it takes time. So if you look after 1 year, that might not be as evident as if you look after 5 years. I'm now going to turn it over to Maribel Olivero of New London Public Schools so she can share with us the experience in New London of implementing a dual language program. Thank you, Maribel.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's staying safe. I am here to just share a little bit about the programming that we've had at New London. Now, we have over 800 Ls right now, but now our dual language programming has been in existence for at least well over 25 years. I've been with the district for at least 20 years, and we've always had those programs, and they were here even well before I was in the district. Now, the programs have varied by location in that, you know, over the years, schools closed, they moved programming around, and so it hasn't necessarily been in the same building, but we have had the programming for quite some time already. A few years ago, we did expand it to include the middle school, because for many years we had the dual language programming, but it kind of cut off in 5th grade. And so then, you know, we always used to wonder, well, you know, it's great programming, but we ended in 5th grade, and then there's nothing else except maybe take you know, Spanish as a second language in your foreign language classes. And so a few years ago, we did decide to experiment with this idea, and we added a dual language program at the middle school. We had it up until last year, and it was actually very successful. The challenges that we faced, though, we ended up having to shut it down because of staffing and a lot of certification issues. And so what happens is, as students move up in the grade levels, the certification requirements actually change. And I'll talk a little bit about that later when I get into some of the pros and cons of programming. Our programming right now, for a long time, we've had, like I said, pre-K through 5. Right now, our dual language programming is in kindergarten through 5th grade at Jennings. Next slide, please. So some of the characteristics of our programming, like Megan talked about, there's different models. Now, we've been following the two-way 50-50 model, and really what that means is we really try to recruit a lot of the native English speakers so that we can have a balanced program where you have equal number of Spanish speakers to the native English speakers. And again, it's really more of the idea of having a balanced program that really honors both languages, and so that it's not subtractive, such as the transitional bilingual programming, but rather additive, and really, you know, instead of telling kids, okay, well, you know, you're in the United States now, and, you know, you're just going to forget your Spanish, because English is really more important. So it really gives a lot of value to their home language. With the programming, we have a sort of co-teaching model, in the sense that we have 2 teachers who are teamed up together, and those 2 teachers deliver the instruction. One teaches in Spanish, the other one teaches in English, and they switch students. So, you know, the English teacher, if she's got 25 kids and the Spanish teacher has 25, we create a schedule where they actually swap classes. And so the schedule really varies depending on the year, you know, what's going on in the district or in that particular school, and trying to make everything kind of align nicely. But typically the students switch classrooms on a either daily or daily and weekly basis. Now, at times we've had to change it again to meet the student needs, meaning that, you know, certain years and like certain groups of students that just cannot handle the transition, and so we try to really work with whatever is needed at the time, and really try to keep to that model. But we also know that we work with children, and you know, we need to be flexible with what's in their best interest. And if switching on a daily you know, rate that doesn't work for them, then we need to really you know, align the schedule and switch the schedule around so that it works for everyone. Now, the model, again, it is Spanish and English, and we really try to, again, recruit people, but that can come with its challenges. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to share some of the successes and the challenges that we've had. So within our successes, you know, it's really a beautiful thing, I think, for myself to see the cultural integration in the academics, you know, so that it's not just about, you know, certain holidays and events that happen and we celebrate, you know, the cultural heritage, you know, in October or anything like that, but to really see it integrated in the academics through the literature that is used in the classrooms, and we really focus on making sure that we find authentic literature. So it's not something that is just translated. It's just not the same. And even some of the images and some in the books, it's huge for our kids to make sure that they have authentic literature in their hands. Seeing bilingual, biliterate, I tell you, when, you know, to Megan's point, it does take time for students to really build their language skills, but seeing it at the middle school, when you get to a certain grade where kids are reading and writing and they're like rigorously, and you see the rigor in the classroom and the materials and what they're able to produce, and seeing kids write essays in Spanish, it's like, you know, it's just, it warms your heart, and you get, you know, you get so excited to see them be able to do that in both English and in Spanish. And so to me, that's just like, that's huge, because it just shows that you can certainly do it. Over the years, I've had opportunities to, you know, visit other programs and across the country, and I've actually seen programs in high schools where they've had these programs established, and it's just a beautiful thing to see kids learning, you know, chemistry and science, social studies, learning all the content in both English and Spanish. Now, I you know, I have on my slide here, English learners exit quicker. Now, mind you, I haven't done any longitudinal studies or anything like that, but I say that because it is anecdotal data. You know, it is patterns that we have seen, and it's something that I certainly want to really explore more. But, you know, when you look at the English learners and how they're exiting, we have seen that a lot of our Ls are exiting a lot faster, meaning that they're not necessarily long-term Ls where they're like in high school, but it is something that I think is worthy of looking further into. And you know, it makes sense if you think about it. I mean, we talk about how English learners, the importance of that native language, and for students to have that, when students who have that strong background in their native language, they do learn English faster. So, you know, if you look at it from that perspective, it certainly makes sense. Now, a few years ago, back in 2015, we actually tried to relaunch the dual language program at our school, and the reason for that was just to really try to move away from some of the misconceptions that the community had. And so we actually had a session with Thomas and Collier where they came in, they did some professional development with our teachers, and really it was just more of a morale boost, because sometimes when you're in these programs, teachers feel like they're always forgotten. And by that I mean English is always first. And so when you're looking at even curriculum or the purchasing of materials, it's just always seems like people think about the English side, and sometimes they're like, oh, wait a minute, what about the Spanish side? And so teachers are constantly doing that. And so really the point of bringing them in was really to educate everybody, the community. We had a parent session where the parents were able to come in and listen to them and listen to their research, and really help us promote the programming at the school. Now, we've had some stability with some of the K-2 teaching staff, in that they've been there, they've been steady, the same teachers, and that's important for programming, which is actually something that is a challenge. And I'll get to the challenges in a second, but certification issues, you know, so you find teachers, and so sometimes because we don't have a large pool of bilingual teachers to choose from, we end up, you know, with a lot of turnover, and that's never good for programming. We've also had one of the nice things with the dual language program too that I've listed is this for many, many years already. There's a fiesta, what they call a fiesta, and so the dual language classes participate. They, you know, have raffle baskets. The parents love it, and it's kind of become a tradition. And so the dual language classes, the teachers get the kids together, and they really put on performances, and it's really a fun event. And it's something that our parents always look forward to because it's a major celebration of their culture. Now with the challenges, I know I got into them a little bit, but lack of certified bilingual teachers. I mean, I think that's kind of, I put that at the top because that is really the biggest challenge in that, you know, for elementary school teachers, you can't just have an elementary certification. You also have to be certified in bilingual, which means additional coursework, additional money. And so sometimes it really deters teachers from going into dual language because, you know, they're thinking to themselves like, look, I could be a regular elementary school teacher, not spend all this extra money on classes, and you know, I'm still going to make the same amount of money. Like, there's no advantage to switching over to dual language, I should say. The beauty of it, though, is that teachers who are working in dual language programs, they do it because it comes from their heart. They love it. It's a calling, and they just love being with the kids and really teaching them in Spanish. And so they do it. There's a lot more work that comes with it in comparison to their colleagues, because when you have two groups, you know, if you look at an elementary school teacher, you have, you know, you have two groups where, you know, some of your colleague across the hallway may only have one group. And so that's double the amount of grading. That is double the amount of materials as well. And so there is a little extra work that comes with that. But you know, like I said, a lot of the teachers that go into it, they love it, and so that's kind of what we want to do. We want to keep teachers that are loving what they're doing, and continue to grow the program. One of the biggest misconceptions for our program, which is actually different than a lot of programs in other districts and in other states, is this misconception that it's only for English learners. And that, again, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about Thomas and Collier visiting, was really the idea that it's not for English learners. You know, everybody, you think, oh, that's for bilingual, but that's only for the bilingual kids. That's only for the kids who don't speak English. And so we really have had to do a lot of work to really educate the community, to educate not just staff, because some of it too is within the district, just a lack of knowledge, but really doing that work with the community and the parents so that they understand that this is a two-way program, and we encourage and we want all kids to become bilingual and biliterate. Next slide, please. Okay, so next steps for our district right now are pre-K 5 elementary school, CB Jennings. They're in the process of becoming authorized as an IB school. Now, if you're familiar with IB programming, languages is a huge component of it, and we are looking forward to expanding that programming to the middle school and high school as well. We want to continue to collaborate with the district. As I mentioned earlier, you know, people don't always think of the Spanish side of it. And so we always find ourselves in situations where, you know, if there's not good if there's not, you know, you don't have some good collaboration going on in the district where, you know, a program may be purchased, and, you know, after it's purchased, you find out that, oh, wait a minute, the Spanish materials aren't ready. Or, you know, we don't really have as many Spanish materials as we thought. And so that's huge, because it really it's very disheartening to teachers when we purchase a program and you have a group of teachers teaching in a dual language program that are not able to really make good use of it, and they end up translating, and it's just all around, it's just not a good situation. So the last couple of years we've been really good about making sure that we are inviting dual language teachers, L teachers, and so any type of curriculum, any type of decisions that are being made as a district for programs and anything that goes on, so that they have a voice, and so that they're not forgotten. And finally, we want to try to reinstate the middle school program. The challenge really with the middle school is the certification again, because we need to have, especially at the secondary levels, not only do you have to have your bilingual certification, but you also need to have your content. So if you're teaching science, you need to have your science certification, and then you can only teach science, and you also need your bilingual to teach bilingual science. So it gets a little complicated at the secondary level, but we're trying to look at our staffing and see what steps we can take to really reinstate the program, because it was very popular and parents really loved it. So thank you. I will turn it over to Pedro Mendia, who is going to speak to you from New Haven Public Schools.
Thank you, Maribel. So I'm going to begin talking a little bit about the history of the dual language programs in the New Haven Public Schools. And one of the things that you are going to hear are that some of the same, challenges or opportunities and strengths of the programs, I think that as Maribel was expressing, will come through. Clinton Avenue Language Academy in the New Haven Public Schools probably was the, almost the origins of what will become dual language programs. It was really a program where Spanish was being taught as a foreign language, where every student, needed to learn some Spanish. And I'll tell you, because from experience, I was that teacher, who used to teach Spanish to English speakers, and I used to come into the classroom just for half an hour. So that was in the early 1990s. John C. Daniels then came, and became the first dual language program in the city, although at the time it was Prince School, which was a kindergarten through grade 2. And that was in the school year 1997, 1998. Later on, it grew up to an adjacent school next to it, Welch Annex, in grades 3 through 5. So it became, 50-50 English, Spanish, K through 5 dual language program. In about, let's see, 2016, no, 2005, I think, Columbus Family Academy received, as a part of a 5-year Title VII School Improvement Grant, a grant to create a model for dual language that improved academic achievement of ELS and increased parental services and involvement and enhanced instructional staff training. So that's when the second school in the district, became a dual language program. During the 2015 legislative session in Connecticut, the legislators passed pilot monies, to create better opportunities for English learners across the state. And at that point, New Haven received pilot funding that in 2016-2017 school year implemented or began the newest of our dual language program in New Haven Public Schools, which is a Fairhaven K-8. Fairhaven K-8 school is the largest elementary school in the district. It has over 800 students, and currently the program, again, a 50-50 model, is being implemented kindergarten through grade 3, and it is growing, one grade, per year. Next slide, please. Jancy Daniels became, and currently is, kindergarten through, well, it has a pre-K program too, but it's pre-K through 8th grade. So what are some of the, successes, the successes, and I think that Megan did touch upon this, is that we moved, from subtractive to additive models of bilingual education, which is providing our students with access, to truly becoming bilingual, bicultural, and achieving, high academics in both English and in Spanish. So it's providing them with access, to a curriculum that it is rigorous. I mean, another success, and it was pointed out earlier by Maribel, is that there's an increased parental and community engagement, in terms of, our parents and who are really engaged with those programs, and we've been able to demonstrate that they have higher academic achievement. And another success is just one of the outcomes of dual language programs, and that is that our students become bilingual, bicultural, and that they reach those higher achievement in the content areas. Next, please. So what are some of the challenges? I think some of the challenges are the same ones that have already been discussed, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the resistance that we do see in some of our schools. Not so much in, the schools where the programs are, historically been implemented, such as the one in Jancy Daniels, or Columbus Family Academy, but resistance in that one of the, it's a challenge and it is an opportunity. New Haven Public Schools is really converting all the transitional bilingual subtractive models of bilingualism, programs into additive models, into enrichment programs. And that transition from, I know it's redundant, from transitional bilingual programs to two-way programs or one-way programs shows that there is a little bit of resistance on part of some of the administrators and sometimes on part of the teachers. One, because we live in a high-stake, testing environment where, all that we want to make sure is that our schools, show up in, that they are reaching the academics that they need to. And sometimes there's still some beliefs on part of some of the, the educators that our bilingual students are stopping the school from reaching those levels, which it could not be farther away from the truth. Another challenge it is that idea between neighborhood versus magnet programs in the city, which is a challenge also in terms of enrollment. So some of the magnet programs, there is an underrepresentation or an overrepresentation of one language group. And what ends up happening is that there are not enough linguistic models of those so that we can have a truly balanced program 50-50, which is the way that, we intend to write the, implement the programs. Well, in the neighborhood, sometimes it is challenging, to look for those models, linguistic models of English speakers. Teacher recruitment and retention is always a challenge, and it is a challenge, when we do discuss, implementing programs that go beyond the K-5, program model, which has been the program that we have commonly had in the city, but a model that we are trying to increase, that we want to make sure that our dual language programs do not start in kindergarten and then they stop in the 5th grade, but that they go on through higher school. So that teacher recruitment and the retention of those teachers for some of the reasons that they've been explained earlier, such as the load, of students or the responsibilities, becomes I guess a challenge that we need to overcome. And I will speak at the personal level. In close to 20 years of experience as a bilingual teacher, it was not until my last 4 years when I became a dual language teacher that I truly thought or found that it was the most successful year. And it's true that the load was significant, that I had, double the number of students, but also something that I had, which I didn't have prior to that, it was a peer, another teacher with whom I could really work closely and have discussions about individual students that we were both sharing. So, it was a strength to me, being able to have that co-teacher. So, in addition, so I think that I mentioned the middle school program implementation, how it is, and just in terms of enrollment, is just enrolling, students, that represent, that allow us to do 50-50 models. So we move on to the next step, which is in terms of where do we go from here? Scaling up the programs, and by scaling up the programs, it's not only in terms of creating middle school programs and high school programs, but also scaling them across the district. I spoke a little bit earlier about transitioning from those bilingual programs were subtractive to an additive model. So just converting them. And whether they are a two-way immersion programs or whether they are one-way, that is the next steps in terms of where we want to go. Advocacy for these programs, to ensure that people understand what are the benefits and how the community, not only the students, benefit from, the outcomes of having the population that is truly bilingual and bicultural, that can contribute in multiple languages to the community. In terms of the next steps, is also I'm going to talk about professional development. I spoke about resources that we do need, time being one, because that is one of our largest also maybe constraints. But the next in terms of the next steps is how we see that we can add additional time for professional development, not only for our classroom teachers, but also for our administrators, so that they understand, what are the non-negotiables, what are those guiding principles that Cal speaks about, and how is it that we can bring them truly to life. So this time to provide professional development for all the stakeholders, that are involved in making sure that we can have programs that are true to those guiding principles, that are definitely beneficial for all of our students. So at this point, I would like to pass to Denise Bossari. Denise?
Thank you, Pedro. Hello, everyone. I hope that this presentation finds you well and that you're looking forward to this beautiful weekend that we're supposed to have, as I am. I wanted to start with a little bit of history. I felt it was important to share with you how we began our journey, particularly as I know that some of you listening may also be looking to make that same journey. We are a brand new program and we are going into our 4th year. So I hope that the information I share with you is helpful. I came to Stratford in April of 2016, and while that may seem like an awkward time to enter a district, it really afforded me the opportunity to make connections and develop relationships with faculty, staff, and fellow administrators. I was able to spend a great deal of time listening, observing, reviewing data and protocols, and really all of this enabled me to develop a vision for the departments I was to serve. With the start of that new school year came many program visits, conversations with program leaders and experts, both within and across state lines, countless hours of research, and a great deal of learning. Coupling this with lessons learned by others from their experiences, both positive and challenging, 2 colleagues in this, well, 3 actually, in this presentation itself, allowed me and helped me to create a strong program model and a cogent plan to present to the various stakeholders of our community. We held our first kindergarten class lottery in April of 2017, and I am very proud and happy to say that we just held our fourth 2 weeks ago. I've included a table just so that you can see how we are growing as a district and how and why the need for bilingual programming is a strong need in our district. Next, please. Welcome to Juntos. That's the name that we decided upon because we're working together. We are learning, sharing language and culture to become bilingual, biliterate, and bicultural. We are a sending and receiving model because there is only one dual language program in the district. We do ensure that native language support is provided to non-dual language bilingual mandated schools. And the 4 goals that we have here, I think, are the same goals that all of us that have implemented dual language programs are to promote academic instruction so that all of our students become bilingual and biliterate through the implementation of state and local frameworks and standards, develop cross-cultural understanding, demonstrate high levels of academic achievement, and provide a variety of opportunities for positive interactions among families sharing their cultural heritages. We are also a 50-50 model as described by Megan and Pedro and Maribel. And we also are using 2 teachers to deliver that instruction. We have both languages in our 50-50 models in Spanish. Both languages are used equally for instruction at all grade levels. All subjects are taught in both languages at all grade levels. And in a moment on the next slide, you'll be able to see what a day in the life of a dual language learner looks like. And we are also making sure that we do not reteach or translate. And I think, you know, what I've learned is that that's kind of one of the hardest things for people to wrap their heads around is that, you know, we're teaching in 2 different languages. And yet, how do the kids get it? Well, we have a variety of methods and strategies that we use. And, you know, it is absolutely amazing to see how quickly students grasp the content and the language. If you take a look, Stratford Public Schools Day in the life of a dual language learner, I think both Maribel and Pedro have kind of alluded to schedules that are similar. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things. We work on an A week, B week schedule. You can see where this is A week. And so what would this look like for a student? They would begin their morning in Spanish, and all of the contents that you see listed below that week A Spanish morning would be taught in Spanish. And then they would move over in the afternoon to have those content areas taught in English. Just a couple of things that we have been working through and with in our program in particular, looking at what we call the Reader's Workshop. That's the program that we use in Stratford. And so how we have operated that is that Reader's Workshop continues throughout the entire week. So what that means, if there are 5 lessons, lessons 1 through 5 would be taught in Spanish in week A, and lessons, you know, 6 through 10 would be taught in English in week B. Now, of course, we know that that would be the ideal and things never happen that neatly. So it's super important that teachers have that collaboration time to say, okay, hey, where did you leave off so that I can pick up where you left off? But there is no reteaching and there is no translation. The other piece that I find, you know, interesting and unique, and we've been going back and forth about it, is how we have handled the math, social studies, and science. And the way that we've been doing that is that teachers teach it by the unit. So an entire unit, while the Spanish teacher may teach the entire unit of math in Spanish, the English teacher is then teaching the social studies and science units in English. And then once the units are done, there's a bridge over to each of the languages, and they flip-flop. Math would then be taught in English, and the science and social studies would then be taught in Spanish. We have found that to be working well for us. When we first started, we were having teachers teach all the subjects week by week, and it just became overwhelming, I think, for the teachers. And I think doing the unit by unit has proven better for everyone. Next, please. Some of the, I call them challenges turned opportunities. And, you know, as a new program, we're constantly learning. adjusting, evaluating, and by no means have we resolved the issues that are on this slide. But we've kind of shifted our lens to look at them as opportunities and celebrate the successes that they have brought us. So the first thing I've listed here is, commitment. And I think when I'm talking about this, I'm really talking about from the English speaker side. And I think most of that we've found has come as a result of a misconception of what the program is. And despite, all of our efforts to communicate the details and the description of the program, there seemed to still be this thought about learning Spanish as it would be in a world language class. And so that has caused us to really take a look at our application process. We've put in place a few things that, we said there's a mandatory session that families must attend if they're interested, so that they have a true understanding of what the program is. And, while we don't have commitment, anyone making a commitment for a number of years, I think that by putting those sessions into place, we have really stopped some of those misconceptions. The next item here is time constraints. I think everyone realizes that teaching oral and literacy skills in 2 languages, the day never seems to have enough hours in it. So we've really had to take a look at how we can create an integrated curriculum, meaning we're kind of removing the silos of block times, and we're really wrapping literacy into our content and into everything that we do, so that there's a connection. Students see the connection between everything that they're doing. It's not just, literacy time, reading time, or it's not just social studies time. We're really building and making connections between the content and the language. And I think it's, for us, we've seen that it's a much more meaningful learning experience for students. Another challenge turned opportunity is the overassessment that we're seeing. With assessing 2 languages comes 2 sets of testing, and I think all of us on both sides of the aisle agree it's too much for students. So this has moved us to be looking or taking a look at more intentional evaluations, what's really going to truly yield the most meaningful information, adjusting timelines, district timelines, or at least, building timelines in terms of particularly the frequency of testing. And, we are really looking at this as an opportunity for teachers to dig deeper and get to know each student. So, there's definitely a shift in understanding of growth, not necessarily within our program, but people, the faculty outside of the program. Which brings me to the next is, being a program within a building. It's great to be in a building, but with that also comes the challenge of being able to build our own dual language community, because we are a part of the building and we want to be a part of that. So we also need to build our own community. So what's been a positive and a great opportunity for us is that parents have really stepped up and increased their involvement and created activities and opportunities and events outside of the classroom, so that we can build our dual language community. Another area of a challenge turned opportunity, as I see, is the over identification of tiered students. Again, it's more about having those collegial conversations and really trying to help our colleagues who are not in the education, the bilingual education, to conceptualize that students are progressing. It's hard for them to understand that because it's so far out of their wheelhouse. So one of the things that we have really been able to utilize is the zone of biliteracy, and that kind of serves as an anchor. Of course, there are many other facets that we use, but that is something concrete that we have been able to refer back to and help others understand, and continually having those conversations. So I think the biggest thing I would say is that we are having lots of good conversations and discussions, and for the edification of all. The last one, the elitist program, and I want to say this as particularly as being a new program, is that if it's not navigated, all of this is not navigated in the right way, the program can adopt an elitist perception in the sense that it is for the English speaker as opposed to the English learner. So, you know, having said that, we continue to make that distinction, and we're thankful and we're grateful for the increase that we've seen in bilingual and bicultural appreciation. But it's something I think that we'll just, you know, always have to emphasize when we come across or come to our lottery process every year. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. You know, next step. So I guess I want to say the first thing that, especially as a new program, we we reflect all the time, but our end of year reflection, we have a tool that we use as well as our own conversations, and we kind of look and grade ourselves as to how are we doing in this area. And again, you know, we're going to constantly adjust, evaluate, and learn new things. But for us, next steps would really be, and I called them maintenance and enhancements because really I couldn't find a nicer way to say flesh and bones. Really, it's about, okay, here's what we need to do in order to have the logistics of the program, and then, you know, and the enhancements in terms of what's going to make it robust. So the maintenance, you know, we're going to continue to roll out 1 grade per year. The goal is to look at K through 12, as you've heard, you know, my colleagues earlier speaking about middle school and high school challenges, and, you know, we're hoping that, you know, we have some time to develop these programs, that by the time we get there, we will have been able to meet the goals that we have. We are going to continue to develop our unit bridges and integrate the curriculum, that spiral curriculum that we have. I talked about earlier. We'd love to see before and after school academic support. I think it's important for all of our kids to be able to have access to that, and we are pretty close to being able to do that for the upcoming school year, pending all of the situation, the COVID situation that we're in now. The district would like me to develop a second program across town, although this is an important year for us being grade 3 and talking about state testing. So that will be interesting for us. And then, you know, we're looking to develop a high school pathway. Now, in order to really bring the program to life, I would like to see us be able to provide more extracurricular cultural activities. You know, we're talking today as a team, even though we're in this distance learning situations, talking about taking field trips, cultural field trips, right? You know, and being creative, just having sing-alongs. I mean, you know, I know that may seem kind of mundane, but we are K1, 2, and now 3. And so, you know, we're looking for ways to get kids and families excited about the culture that they have or the culture that they're learning about. I'm looking for big brother, big sister mentoring. One of the things we've talked about is having our English learners, particularly at the high school, serve as mentors for our younger students. I think that would be a great way to have students making connections, because I think everybody can use a strong peer connection. Create language and literacy programs for parents in both languages, because we do have a lot of parents asking, especially our English-speaking parents, they would love to be able to communicate, and to some degree with their children, and they just want to be able to participate in their learning. As you can see there, provide more opportunities to build our community, as I've mentioned before. And, you know, another thing that we're looking at is building a summer camp, kind of getting our kindergarten students ready for the program, and then kind of helping us facilitate some avoidance of summer rust. And I think that sums up mine. I believe that's the last slide. So I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
Well, thank you so much for those overviews. Before we entertain questions, I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself, Michael, Pei, the CSDE, and the attendees at this webinar for sharing your expertise. All 3 of you bring unique insights and unique contexts from your various districts, and it's so interesting to hear about your innovative approaches. When we were thinking about this webinar, we really saw that you three would be able to potentially discuss kind of the maintenance of an ongoing program, as well as the growth of programs and the development of new programs. And certainly you didn't disappoint, so thank you so much for sharing that with us. I see that as I was listening to you, I was taking some notes. Not only are these programs really enhancing academic outcomes for English learners that get to partake in them, but they're doing that also for native English speaking students as well when engaged in those programs. And then additionally, they're engaging community and family members, building upon the linguistic skills, valuing and acknowledging the diverse cultural resources that we are afforded by having diverse communities. And so there's just so many positives. I could go on forever. At this point, I'd like to welcome the panelists to go ahead and turn on your videos so that Michelle can share with us some questions if we've received them from the attendees.
Great, thank you, Megan. We do have some questions, and I will start with the first one. I understand that bilingual programs are required in schools with 20+ students of one language, but could a school/district decide to have a bilingual program, a dual language program perhaps, without meeting this criteria? For example, if it works better, could a district just choose to use it for a specific language group of children if the school has 10 children who speak Arabic, for example?
So I'll field that one. Feel free to pipe in, anyone. Yes, districts can do that. There is nothing precluding a district from offering bilingual or dual language programming. That is within the scope of the district's decisions. There are some districts that go they're right on the cusp of that mandated 20 students. Sometimes they might have 22, and then the next year they may have 18. And there are some districts that opt to continue bilingual programming, which would always be our recommendation for consistency year over year. Similarly, if you have students that could benefit from a program like a bilingual program, you certainly do not have to wait until you hit that 20 threshold if that is something that would be, something that would be supported in your district.
Thank you. This is a question for the three district staff. What is happening now with the dual language students during this period of remote learning? How are teachers collaborating to deliver instruction remotely?
Maybe I can start with that one, and then if Denise or Maribel, you want to, pitch in. That is an excellent question. I mean, these are really very, unusual times. In New Haven, I mean, we truly believe that in order to run a good dual language program, there needs to be that collaboration between the English and the Spanish, component between both teachers. I think that if that collaboration is existing, that then the students are being, taught both in Spanish and in English. I mean, this is something that we're still learning about. I mean, this is not something that we jump into, saying, well, what does distance learning look like in a dual language setting? So we are learning as we go. Dr. Tracy, our superintendent, does say that we are flying the airplane as we're building it, or with our boat. So we're still learning, we're still gathering resources. And my instructional coaches, are supporting those schools and those teachers in finding additional materials that will support that biliteracy, development, both in not only in terms of reading and writing, but in math.
Okay, and I can also add that in our district right now, since we only have the programming at the elementary schools, the initial issue that we had was we're using a platform called Seesaw for the elementary schools, and so their initial issue was really back to the access of bilingual or Spanish materials, and so they had to do a lot of work, within the site, and they had to put in a lot of extra hours to really make it work for students. They are meeting as grade level teams in the schools, so they're certainly doing that, and they're able to collaborate, and so they do that with their English partner. It's just again, back to the materials, and so they're doing the best they can, but they are facing some challenges with lack of materials in Spanish, and so you have a program that really wasn't designed to be a bilingual program. It was really designed with English in mind, and so they have to work around, but our teachers are very resilient because that is the world of being in a dual language or bilingual program, is always trying to stay on top of things, and always, you take 2 steps forward and then, oh geez, something happened, you take another one back. But they're managing, and they really they love the kids. They care so much about the kids. They're calling parents all the time, and so there's a lot of communication with the parents. And some of them have ordered materials for spending their own money, but it hasn't been perfect. But because they have their own classroom, it's actually worked a lot better than the English, the ESL teachers. So the ESL teachers, who I meet with all the time, it's just a challenge trying to provide the support and the services to kids. And so in this case, the dual teachers, because they have their own set of kids, they have their own classroom that they're responsible for, it's actually been a little bit more manageable.
Like Pedro and Maribel, our teachers are finding some of those same challenges, but they have done an amazing job in terms of collaborating with one another. We are obviously much smaller, so that we have maybe not as many of those same challenges that New Haven and New London does, but our teachers have been using the Google Classroom platform, and they've been having asynchronous learning, and they've been able to have conversations with students in both languages. Clearly, we've had to change our scheduling in terms of what does that look like in terms of both languages every day. We've had to change that, but we are all working hard to find materials, and myself included, and there are no boundaries when it comes to distance learning. It's not like school starts at 8:45 and it ends at 3:30. I think we're all working around the clock to make this as successful as we can for students.
Great, thanks. I have a question for Michael, and maybe for Megan too. What is happening now with, how is the state coding biliteracy programs? Do students in those programs need extensions? And are you using students' codes to track students in your bilingual project?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the last one. We are looking at the codes and the schools that were mandated to try and identify students that we really can have a level of comfort that they actually were in a bilingual program. Because the codes, just be upfront about it, the codes can be messy in PSIS. And especially all of them, but especially like the ESL codes. And we've said that really that's the ESL code reflects the service the student most gets, but we understand that really it's a mix of different models. So we try and be careful in how much weight we give to a particular code, or how much, we know it's not carved in stone. So for the project, we're trying to be really careful about who we think is a bilingual student. As far as the other questions, Megan, did you want to jump in on those?
Sure, yes. We are delineating in the bilingual project whether the student is is a bilingual, a transitional bilingual student, or a dual language student. And as Michael alluded, we're looking at the districts and the schools that offered those programs as a check to ensure that a code didn't travel with a child from, for instance, a former dual language program, and then the child moved to a district that didn't even have bilingual and maintained that code. So we're trying to do some data cleaning to ensure that we are providing as accurate a representation of the outcomes of those student groups as possible. So to kind of expound on that a little, yes, we have in our EL program codes, we have a specific code for dual language programming. So we would be able to look at that program code to determine as a first check whether it appears a student is enrolled in dual language or a transitional program or some type of ESL or a parental refusal, etc. And then with the first question, it is not necessary to request an extension if a student is enrolled in a dual language program. A student could be enrolled in a dual language program for the entire duration of their pre-K-12 experience if such programs existed, with the rationale being that they are additive in nature and that the students would be concurrently learning English and academics in English while also learning the other language.
And periodically, we do try and work with the PSIS people to do some review of the codes. So maybe it was 2 years ago, Megan, I can't remember exactly, but we did look at the dual language code and follow up with districts where we had no understanding that there was a dual language program there, and yet students were coded that way. Another example would be there's a code for those high school students who have less than 30 months until they graduate. And yet we were finding there were kindergarten students with that code. And so we followed up with districts about that too. But I mean, we understand that you know, some of that coding is a little not set in stone.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. And this one is also directed at our district experts. Let's see, my question involves being a middle school bilingual teacher. I noticed that Maribel had bilingual resources as a challenge. I have the same issue. For schools that are having success with dual language classes, what resources are being used? I teach in a self-contained middle school classroom with mixed 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
So I will say that as far as the materials, you know, spacing is also an issue, because if you are a self-contained teacher and you're teaching in both languages, that means you need double the amount of materials. So you need the materials in English and Spanish. It really kind of depends on the model that's being used as to whether or not you're, you know, the Spanish is only going to be taught with math, for example, because the, you know, every district and every program does it differently. And so some schools decide to say, okay, well, we're going to teach, you know, the science and the math is going to be in English, but the literacy and like the social studies is going to be in Spanish. So it really depends. Either way, you know, you still have all these materials that you have to have on hand. One of the biggest and most important things is to really collaborate with the district when they're purchasing materials, and you need to get on those committees when they're reviewing, you know, textbooks and so forth, because you really need to advocate for materials that are going to be available also in Spanish, because for a number of reasons. For one, you want alignment. You want you don't want our kids to necessarily use a different tool than the rest of the students. You know, there needs to be some alignment there. There are a lot of companies, and usually when you go to like certain conferences and so forth, and you know, there's some exhibits there, that's usually where we've gotten a lot of our resources and really connecting with other folks across the country. Because when you go, again, when you are able, if you happen to go to some of these conferences, you know, you meet all sorts of people, and so they have, oh, this is a great resource, and how come we don't know about it? Oh, well, Texas uses it all the time. And so we get our teachers, like we have a teacher right now that came from Texas, and so he's telling us about all these other materials and assessment tools that that they use that look really good. And so again, it really goes back to the district, because you can't work in isolation. You know, you have to work with your academic office, with your superintendent's office, and really being an advocate is like huge, to make sure that you push for products that really have a Spanish component to it.
So, I think I will echo what Maribel just said. I mean, it depends on whether you are departmentalized. In most schools, we begin the departmentalization in, 6th grade, let's say, even if it is in 5th grade. I mean, if you are doing readers and writers workshop, I think that it is easier than if we are saying that you are going to be doing, because let's face it, it's usually about Spanish materials. It's never about the English materials. That as the school is purchasing libraries, that you are ensuring that they are looking at, purchasing libraries, in those, grade bands, and that there is that alignment in terms of the standards that are being met, grade level expectations for those grades. I know that we did not mention one of the challenges that we do have, in dual language programs, is that at times there is an unbalance. So, in terms of where some of our English speakers, might be in their development of Spanish, so that making sure that there is a wider range, of materials. So again, it depends, when you ask about materials, I mean, the easiest one, it would be readers and writers workshop.
Great,
Sorry,
thank you, Doug. Did you wanna chime in?
No, I was going to echo the same sentiments as Maribel and Pedro. And we are in that very boat, and I am fortunate enough to be at the district level so that I can advocate for those programs. But no, I'm good.
So I think at this point, we'll close, Michelle. I do want to also just point out that we're so lucky to have the three of you here, and I hope you don't mind that we are sharing in the next slide your contact information. So that person who asked that question or other colleagues, we encourage you, of course, to reach out to us at the State Department, but we acknowledge that we have so much to learn from our colleagues in the field, the experts that are implementing the work. We think of you three and others as great thought partners, and we value your expertise. And so whomever asked that question, I encourage you to reach out to your colleagues. Also, I encourage you to consider being a part of the NABE organization, the National Association for Bilingual Education. We also have the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Education, that is our regional link to NABE, the National Association for English Learner Program Administrators. Those professional organizations are really focused on dual language as well, and they can be great resources for reaching out to get additional information, both from people at the state, within your states, and also from other states. So I thank you very much for your being here. Please note that this information will be recorded and posted. In the subsequent slide, you'll see my contact as well as Michael's and our colleague Pay's. And please reach out to us at any point with questions. Thank you.